Hello, and welcome to the Radical Empaths Podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Liz.
And on this show, we're exploring and analyzing cultural norms.
And questioning our society's intricacies with thoughtful nuance.
We're challenging conventional thinking and finding some hypocrisies to critique along the way.
But most importantly, we're remaining mindful, humble, and able to create some meaning out of all of our discussions.
All right, here we are, episode 1 of the Radical Empaths Podcast. And we've got quite a name here for ourselves, and we've decided to put ourselves in a lane where many might not. It's uncharted waters, a cultural critique podcast, the Radical Empaths. It deserves a little bit of explaining, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, we could each go over our explanation or our individual meaning of how we feel about the terms and how we relate to them.
Yeah, right. Because it seems like kind of like an oxymoron, right? Like radical and empath, like why would they be put together like that? Well, in our experience, we tend to find that there's a lot of different areas in life where we feel like we have, areas of our life where we would consider to be common sense positions, logical, rational, based on our moral framework and our empathy, where maybe it kind of goes against the grain of what is acceptable or normal in our society and what culture deems to be moral. So we can find some dissonance in that, and we can find some friction. And that's kind of the point of this podcast, is to explore some of those things, to explore some of the ways that culture or our society creates ways of thinking that may go against an empathetic mindset, that may go against the way that you would normally operate if you were really using your core principles and applying them to everyday situations. So with all that said, I think a good place to start is with where each of us feel the most relation to the term radical empaths in our daily personal lives in a profound way. I'll let you share a little bit about that. In what way do you feel yourself being a radical empath in the most profound way?
I feel that most profoundly with veganism and the journey that both of us have individually gone on, but kind of done it together. We've both come a long way with that, and it's just constantly felt like I've been learning consistently. Like there's not been a point where I feel like I know everything about it, or about myself and about how the way that people relate to other animals, non-human animals. So I think that that's kind of where I would land. Like that's where I'm the most.
That's where you want to start. That's where we want to start the podcast. Like that's the thing that is the most resonant. It's the thing that we feel the most relates to Radical Empaths Podcast is as
the most prevalent aspect of radical empathy would be veganism.
That's right.
To me and
to me too as well. So that's why we really wanted to start here with veganism, because I mean, you can see where radical and empath would apply to veganism. I mean, I'll speak a little bit to the radical side of things. That's kind of where I find myself drawn to, because I've found myself having opinions, that maybe not even in the realm of veganism, but in other areas of life too. Maybe I think things that don't seem to fit in every now and then, and I kind of find some friction dealing with other people in the world and just dealing with other prevalent ideas that are common. And veganism has been like a huge part of that for me, like a huge way of feeling like a radical and identifying with a radical mindset, which I don't feel is that radical, but it does come across that way. And if you have any interpretation of veganism in like our modern world today, you might think of it as like the extreme diet. That's kind of a way that it gets stereotyped and it gets portrayed as like this is an extreme decision to make for your diet and for your lifestyle. And people think that way. I mean, the way that I would like to look at it is what is more extreme, choosing to not eat any animal products, to not participate in any animal exploitation and suffering, or to participate in animal exploitation and suffering and to pay for that. So that's one of the ways where, in culture that's normal to pay and use animal exploitation to our advantage as humans. And that is seen as moral and okay. And if you have an empathetic view and you kind of speak out against it, you're kind of the radical. You don't really fit in too much in society. So it kind of goes back to the whole ethos of the show is like, what kind of society would take empathetic people and label them as radical? So that's kind of how I think of veganism in terms of being a radical or being an extremist or whatever negative words people want to use to try to smear veganism as a negative movement when it's really just a really profound, empathetic grassroots movement. Um, so speaking of empathetic movement, Liz, how do you feel about the empathetic side of our name and also of how, our empathy relates to our experience as vegans and our veganism?
I would say that, along with what you were saying with, kind of a moral responsibility or, where humans are placed with a moral high ground that gives us more of the ability to have decision making and control over non-human animals, and, their life expectancy and their conditions in which they live for their entire life. I think with our ability to be that empathetic and to express that, I think that comes with a certain level of responsibility to make ethical decisions where, you're looking out for the best interest of the other creatures involved. I think that that's kind of where empathy comes into it in a huge sense because we realize our responsibility and the success that we've had as vegans, just connecting deeper with other forms of life and with ourselves in each other and just other people that we have relationships with. It's that's part of the journey that we've gone on. So.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, empathy is just like ultimately it's putting yourself in someone else's shoes. So, I mean, how would you like it if you were the day of your birth, the day of your death had already been planned and it was, it was in someone else's finance book. They're planning on that to make their profit for that month. Like, if you look at it from that perspective as the oppressor or as the oppressed rather, and you see who the oppressor is, it's pretty easy to see where your sympathies should lie if you do consider yourself an empathetic person. That's kind of the basics of being an empath, as you need to be able to understand the experience of others. And to make it really easy and relatable is, maybe you can turn a blind eye to a cow heading to slaughter so you can eat your meal. But what if it was your dog or your cat? And I know it's like, oh, well, we don't do that because that's not in our culture. And we've just been raised traditionally to not do that. Other cultures do it. We don't do it. So it just brings up a bunch of interesting questions to ask, like where do we define our morality? Is it defined by cultures and traditions, or is morality defined by something larger than that? Maybe something that's not defined. It's just something that we know to be true, just based on a set of shared principles. So, I mean, that's how I would say it relates to empathy. So, you know, a lot of the ideas that we want to share on this podcast, we really don't consider them to be radical. Like we're just being kind of ironic by using the word radical. We're just playing into the stereotype or into the framework that maybe people may view our ideas, the boxes that they may categorize our ideas into, may be seen as radical. So we're just kind of making a play on that. But really, ultimately, I think if you would agree, everything that we say is we feel is pretty common sense. It's just based in rational thinking.
Yeah, and if anything, I would say that radical in my interpretation of how we might see this, especially in terms of like veganism, is you could use that word radical interchangeably with passionate or super caring. Like I
Yeah.
think it's more about the growth we've done and the way that we're able to incorporate how we're viewed in mainstream culture versus how we view ourselves.
Yeah.
So it's
Right.
kind of like an alternative reflection.
Yeah,
if that
that's a
makes
good way to
sense.
put it. But we're still trying to get some clicks, so that's why the show is called Radical Empaths and not Passionate Empaths. So,
Yeah.
we're glad that you're all here with us. We're a lot of different places that we want to take it. We don't necessarily consider Radical Empaths to be like a vegan only podcast. Like we said, it's kind of the way that we most identify with the title of our show. But there are lots of different areas that we'd like to discuss and that we'd like to explore. So, as the show starts to grow and evolve, we're going to be exploring a lot of different topics that kind of make us feel like we're living out in a remote village in culture where we just feel kind of disconnected from the rest of the people, or that we don't really necessarily identify with the predominant prevailing social norms in our
A
society. And
rare breed.
yeah, 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 if you'd like to call us that. Well, I mean, and then, but even just within veganism too, there's like so many things to talk about. And, like I said, it's not just a vegan podcast, but with that said, we can't possibly talk about everything that we'd want to in one episode about the topic of veganism. So,
There's as many topics surrounding veganism as there are different types of vegans. I've met so many different types of vegans, and I feel like that in itself is a topic. So it's kind of like, there's a all-encompassing topic that, you can create a lot of subtopics off of.
right. Yeah, like the environmental impact of animal farming, like all of the diseases that come, and the health risks, and like the wellness aspect of the foods that we eat, the energy that we intake, mindfully consuming the food that we eat.
Advocacy for the animals that
Yeah,
are suffering.
right. The food, the way that we make food, because we also are foodies and we love to talk about that. Um,
Mindful eating and spirituality, I don't know, we mentioned that a little bit, but that's something that we've incorporated into our daily life, and it's helped a lot with our vegan journey.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, exactly. Like there's a ton of things to talk about. So we figured for first episode, we want to get into the things that make us relate to the show title the most. We've established that's our veganism, our journey through veganism. And where's the most important place to start when talking about veganism? In our opinions, it's the animals. And that should be just an objective standard of what's the most important part of veganism. I think Liz and I both get kind of frustrated with uh, the the false perception of veganism kind of being categorized or lumped into a similar area as like paleo or keto or some other kind of like trend diet. Because for veganism to be referred to as a diet or categorized as a diet, it just it kind of belittles the experience and what it's actually supposed to be about. Because veganism really is an entire mindset shift, lifestyle shift, away from moving away from the mindset that says animals are here for our benefit and for what they can provide to us, to moving towards these are a species who is no lesser than us, who deserves respect and sovereignty over their own bodies. And, at the very least, if we're not going to care for them and look after them, we shouldn't be slaughtering them by the billions.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where we'd like to start, I think. There's a lot even to what I just said. So maybe even the best place to start is just kind of talking about like animal activism, animal advocacy, because we're a little bit new to this publicly facing animal advocacy. That's kind of what we're exploring here with this podcast. So, I mean, I just I don't know. I want to hear what you have to say about this list. I want to hear what you think like the most important things are in animal advocacy, and like ways that we've incorporated it in our life so far, ways that are attainable for others. How do you think people, if they're interested in this topic, can get more involved?
I think that really easy ways are there's tons of organizations out there that you can do your own research on. We can link some below in the description of ones that we personally like or are a part of. Um, just to become educated. I think that's the first thing, first and foremost, become educated on. not only the types of animals you're interested in helping, but how they need their help and what you can do to make the greatest impact with the means that you're working with. I know personally, I don't think that animal advocacy should necessarily require you to have money or loads and loads of cash in order to make an impact. So there's lots of corporate legislation and organizing that you can be a part of, just signing petitions and being part of virtual events. You don't even have to leave your house to make a difference. So I think that that's important for people to not be so discouraged of, oh, I have to, go to a sanctuary that's this far away. And, you don't really have to do that. It is great to be able to have those opportunities, but, and I encourage you to do so if that's something you're able to do. But yeah, aside from donating and, being able to help sanctuaries with their medical bills and, other things like that, I think just being part of petitions and, you know, going after the corporate legislation is probably the most powerful impact that you can make.
You mean like lobbying?
Yeah, lobbying and, like,
Yeah.
just becoming part of, like, a bigger movement that's pre-existing as a starter, as a beginner, because they can really get you inspired and motivated to if you're interested in starting a grassroots movement, then that's a way that you could be more informed before you go out that way, in that direction.
Right. Yeah. Because that's a big part of it is more informed. Because I was going to share, my the way that I think of activism can be a little bit more subtle too. Like even if it doesn't mean that you're joining something or that you're signing up for something, which like if you can and you want to, then you totally should. Not downgrading those. But other options that you have is like you can buy vegan stickers and go and stick them in places, like do some vandalism, but good vandalism for a cause.
And we can link some, link some of the, cool vegan artists that we know that create kind of, cool messages, stickers and artwork, so you can start that up as
The ones
well.
that we know. Liz is being modest because Liz is an artist and Liz makes vegan stickers. That's on our website, which will be linked. So that's some real sneaky marketing you got there.
Yes, but I know there's also a couple others I'd like to link to.
There's others. It's not just yours.
You'll see a few.
And aside from stickers, it's also like wearing a shirt, going in public and wearing a shirt, or bringing some chalk and just writing on the grocery store pavement. Write "Go Vegan" real quick, things like that. But like you were saying, having the right amount of information, because I know that for me, part of my journey for veganism is I only fairly recently, within the last couple of years, have started to feel comfortable wearing outwardly vegan shirts, merch in public.
What was your initial thought with wearing
Like my
things like
initial like
that?
reservation of doing it.
Yeah, what was your initial reservation of
It was just that I felt like I didn't like I believed in the cause, but I didn't know how to properly articulate it, and I was worried that I'd get, which I probably wouldn't, but I was worried that I would get like a real life troll, like someone who you find in a Facebook comment thread who would just be like, "Oh, where do you get your protein from, bro?" But I don't think people would actually do that in person. But maybe it was a little bit of an irrational thing for me. But I was worried about that because I didn't want to be confronted by anyone who would have anything to say about veganism. Whereas now I feel way more comfortable. I got my baby legs out from under me. I know how to talk about it. I know how to handle questions. I know how, any types of counter arguments that somebody might have. I kind of have a counter to the counter. Or at least I think I do. I'd like to hear from all of you if you have a differing opinion from what we've said here today. But that's what it was for me, is like feeling like I didn't know enough. And I learned more, so I feel more confident being able to do that form of subtle activism, which is an important form. I feel like it's something that I love doing. I love wearing my human liberation, animal liberation shirt out everywhere, and that's just a way to do it. But like you were saying, like having enough information is an important part. So that's kind of like a new avenue of activism that I feel like we're starting to explore, is being able to have a platform like this so that we can help to do some of that educating. We want to be able to talk about these issues and talk about animal farming, animal agriculture, mass industrial animal farming, which is maybe an underexplored topic, and it might be something that you haven't necessarily dug into yet. And if you are paying for those products regularly and you're eating them and consuming them on a daily, weekly basis, then, it's worth it to know what goes into the production of those products. So that's kind of what we want to dig into a little bit, either on this episode or in future episodes. But
And
yeah,
going back
that's
to what we were saying about, the things that you can do to get started and things like that, it
mhm,
could be as easy as having a discussion with someone or having a group of people that you want to be able to talk to. I think that opening up discussion for yourself and admitting maybe that, you don't know everything and you're learning and, you have questions about things. I think that talking to people that are open to hearing your questions and basically having an open mind is key to your vegan journey, if that's something you're interested in, or animal activist journey, is being surrounding yourself with open-minded people that are able to learn and grow with you.
yeah.
So, even just having a discussion with someone it can change your life.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's because I mean that's part of like I feel like being radically empathetic, like as vegans, is recognizing and understanding like there's an immense amount of social pressures that people deal with. You might be completely wrapped into your traditions, wrapped into your social encounters, your family, your friends, and it's a lot of deprogramming to do to make it so that you can stand your ground and have firm boundaries about what you are and aren't willing to participate in, and you know it might be seen as extremist or radical by some, but ultimately, like I mentioned before, like if you're rooted in your moral certainty of your decision that you're making, you can stand with your convictions and hold them true. And that's a very powerful thing to do. And you can only hope that helps to plant a seed in others as well. Hopefully through your conviction, the courage of your convictions, you can be inspirational to others in their vegan journey, and because that's kind of the whole point of this movement is to start to get people on board and slowly but surely start to chip away at the beast of of industrial animal farming, and starting to reduce the suffering and pain and suffering that exists in that industry.
Right.
Um, so I mean that kind of leads us into, we could talk about the industry, but we also wanted to talk about like what it means to eat mindfully, and to, like we were saying, be educated about all these things, and to think about what goes into the production of your food, and to think about what you're actually eating, what you're intaking, and like the energies that you may be getting from the food that you're getting as well. And I don't know, I guess let me ask you this, Liz. Like, do you think that there's a energetic difference of what you're intaking into your body when you eat, say, bacon that came from a pig,
You're asking if there's a difference between.
between that and say a stalk of broccoli?
Yes, I definitely would, yes, I would
Is that the
definitely agree
easiest
with.
question ever?
I would agree with that, and I think a lot of it has to do with the person and, the way that they relate themselves back to their food, their relationship with food, but for the most part, I would say there is a transfer of energy between you and the food that you're eating, and I think that that's just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about eating animal products, animal byproducts. Their suffering and all the emotions that they were left with seconds before they were slaughtered are still things that you can pick up on well after they're dead, as a result of eating them, as a result of consuming that. It's kind of a stagnant energy that you get left with, if that makes sense. And I mean, there's a deep, you know, I feel like a deeper discussion to be had about that, in a mindful consumption episode, because mindful consumption is all about what you ingest, that can be your food, but it can also be media or, news and just anything that you intake. It could be information. There's lots of things to go into it.
Yeah. I think that you're right that that's like a full episode's worth of content,
It
mindful
is.
eating. But like just to for a quick second to set up the next piece of what we're going to talk about, which is that like you were saying, like moments before that animal is killed, like every feeling and emotion that they're having, because you have to remember, as much as our society tries to get you to not remember this, that's a sentient creature with feelings and emotions and a personality. And, they get put into they have to be in maybe a hot car or a cold car, or not car, but like a truck, where they get transported, and they're crammed into these trucks with all of their friends from the farm that they're at. And it might be super hot out, it might be super cold out, they're subjected to the elements, they might have to go hundreds of miles. So they're scared already, they're tired already, and then they have to get loaded into a slaughterhouse. And to think that these are just mindless robots who just are like, oh, okay, here we go, walking this way now, I'm being herded. No, they're smart. They know what's happening. They can smell the blood.
They're not asleep.
They're afraid.
They're awake.
Yeah. I mean, there's different types of slaughter methods, but in the end of the day, is it moral to take the life of an animal that doesn't want to die for a needless purpose, which is a burger or a steak or whatever food you want to put in there, because we have plant-based alternatives for all these things that reduce the suffering. So that is a needless action, which is not to be taken lightly. And like we were saying, like that all those feelings that animal is feeling right up until that last second, they're carrying with them, and that energy is being transferred over in one way or another. So I mean, this might, if you're not totally with us already and we're not preaching to the choir here, you might be thinking like, what is this? Like, what is some hippy dippy woohoo? But like, there's a lot to talk about there. And there's a lot of implications that eating this way and raising animals for food, it's just a lot to think about as a human species, because we're all animals, like Liz said before. Like we always just use the word animals, but humans are animals, so we're actually meaning non-human animals.
And with our points, we kind of are deconstructing common references in society, like live and let live. Like hearing that is so aggravating, and it's like ironic sometimes, even depending on the context of the conversation. I just feel like something like that. There's lots of examples, but that's a good one.
Yeah.
Of what are you letting live?
Yeah. I mean, I always think that one too. Like that's always something that, some vegans will even say is like, oh, I choose not to eat it, but live and let live. Like I'll let them do what they're going to do. And, you're not really living and if someone else's actions are taking the life of another sentient creature, then it's not really live and let live, is it?
It's ironic on the person's part. That's all I'm pointing out. And I think that we find irony in a lot of common cultural sayings. And I think that
Right.
that's just a good example.
Well, it's because there's hypocrisy baked into the cake of our culture. And that's another ethos of this entire show, is we're kind of exploring that and digging into these different hypocrisies.
Grabbing the microscope,
Yeah, take a peek under the hood,
Yeah.
if you will. But yeah, I mean, that, like, leading into the next part of the discussion then is to bring up the word. I don't know if we've said it yet, but it's kind of like the
Dun, dun, dun.
the overarching vegan vocabulary, if you will, most important word to know, which is speciesism. I wish we had sound effects buttons. Like, we gotta pump
Cheering
it up a little
and
bit. Yeah,
clapping.
Speciesism. Add it in post.
Cue applause.
I mean, it's pretty. If you've never heard the word before, it's pretty self-explanatory. If you're familiar with things like racism and sexism, you can probably
ageism. I mean, species. You just kind of like put two
and two together.
Mm-hmm.
You got four.
Yeah.
So
why don't you break it down for us, though? What does it mean to you, or how do you define that speciesism?
I just see it as an arbitrary classification or categorization of other species as inferior to ours, or not even as inferior, but as less deserving of moral consideration. Um,
Okay.
so, and then to put that into more like practical, less like professorial terms, is like just the difference between a cow and a dog or a pig and a cat. And why is it that our culture has decided that one is a loyal companion that you feed and you protect, and our laws protect them from cruelty? You can go to jail if you abuse a dog, but if you abuse cows by the billions, you can rake in record profits and you're celebrated for providing food. So what is the distinction that makes one on the plate and makes the other in the home snuggling at the foot of the bed?
I'll give a good example real quick. We were driving home from the park the one day over the summer, and there was something going on at this pavilion that was it said a dog welcome to the dog bark BQ. And I was like, barbecue? So does that mean this was an event to help dogs get adopted through the means of cooking other animals and feeding people those animals
Right.
rather than adopting them too.
What
It
a
just didn't make any sense. I was like, barbecue, that's absurd. I've never heard anything so absurd.
What a good example.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, it really does show like what we're talking about with the hypocrisy of our culture. Because it's like we're all going to come together with this hollow sanctimony. Look at how good we are helping these dogs. And like, let's just say, like, are we cool with fostering dogs? Like, are we okay with organizations who take dogs that are in need and help them try to find homes? Of course, that's a good thing. We applaud groups like that because that's good work for you to be doing. But this is just a critique of the absolute hypocrisy of having that sanctimony and coming together with the virtue of we're doing this good thing and we're going to find homes for these dogs and we're going to attract people to come and donate or to come and adopt these dogs by serving them the cooked remains body parts of other animals which our society has determined are less worthy of moral consideration. So that really is like kind of sums up the idea of speciesism, is like the idea that one species is going to be considered above the other. Um,
Or that one is more deserving of becoming a companion to a human than food.
right. Yeah, because I mean, ultimately, I see this as the relation of these animals to of these non-human animals to humans, because I don't really care about getting into a debate of like what's more worthy of moral consideration, a fish or a chicken, or a chicken or a cow. Like to me, that doesn't. I don't want to get dragged into that type of argument. There's so much nuance, and it's like why do we even need to be having that type of discussion when there's so much injustice that happens that we should just look at it right in the face and not try to skirt around it and operate on the margins. Let's just get right down to the, no pun intended, meat and potatoes here and get right to the main point of this, which is to think about like the mass suffering that happens, that we justify because of our taste pleasure and our preference and our tradition and our society. So like I was saying, like I see this as speciesism as the relationship of humans to animals and not so much as animals to other animals, non-human animals, that is. Uh, because, like what gives humans the right in order to make these decisions? Like, why have we been granted the moral high ground to make these determinations of which species are to roam freely and which ones are to be domesticated and cared for and which ones are to be domesticated and systematically abused for food in our food system? A lot of these decisions are arbitrary, and a lot of them are based in this really ugly mindset of speciesism, which is just this arbitrary classification of animals into these different groups. Um, so yeah, I mean, like what gives us the high ground, you know? Um, so I mean that kind of comes to the point of like might makes right, right? Is there anything you want to share about that?
I mean, might makes right just sounds like a cop out for I can do whatever I want because I have this power. I've been given this power. I inherited this power. We've always done things this way, so that's the way we're gonna do it, and that's just the way it is. It is what it is. It gets old. It that thought process is not a growth mindset by any means. That's again stagnation, and I think it's just toxic cycles of suffering and injustice that happen in society in all these different facets beyond veganism. I think that that's
Yeah.
kind of where I would leave it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's like I always myself personally, my experience, I feel the core principles of veganism bleeding out into other areas of life and the way that I view the world. I always will end up feeling this similar types of feelings. Like I have a similar kind of outrage to injustice in other areas where I see it. And I have the same types of criticisms of people of doing horribly or horrific and immoral things for profit and justifying it because we're strong, so we can. We'll do whatever we can in order to make the profit and to justify our own actions just based on like the ends justify the means, right? Like that's the idea. You got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet, no pun intended. So like that whole idea, that whole mindset that people have, I really think needs to be. We really think it needs to be observed and looked at from all different angles because it really is a human exceptionalist mindset, a mindset that says like we as humans are exceptional, we are better and stronger than the other animals, we're at the top of the food chain. There's an interesting topic to get into is the food chain, and there's all kinds of people that would argue that we humans are at the top of the food chain. When go ahead and throw a human with no tools and no fire out into the wilderness and see how much of a predator they are. But talking about the idea of human exceptionalism, really brings me to what I think is like a super important point of this discussion that I want to make sure that we're able to share is that I don't think that we're arguing, and correct me if you disagree with me on this, but at least me personally, I'm not arguing that humans aren't exceptional because there's obviously traits and characteristics of our species, mankind, humans, that, makes us exceptional over other species of animals. I think that's indisputable. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I mean it directly ties into our responsibility for
Right.
caring for the ones that we would view as lower
Yeah.
on that scale. So that's kind of what I was referencing
You were
earlier
saying that before.
with,
Yeah.
how if humans are at the top of the food chain or if that's how they're viewed in our culture, then I think that that gives us the most responsibility.
Yeah. Right. Because like the difference is that the thing that makes humans exceptional is our ability to rationally analyze the morality of the actions that we're making. And
To
then
discuss ethics and to exhibit empathy.
yeah, and to have like nuanced, thoughtful conversations where we guide our behaviors based on the analysis of the morality of the actions. Like we're able to talk about what we do, why we do it, whether it's okay or right to do it. And then we make our decisions based on that. Whereas if you're a part of a herd of lions in the wild, they're not having discussions to rationally moralize their actions and their decisions.
Nor are they killing their prey by the billions.
Right. They're killing their prey as they need them, and they're doing it based on necessity because they're obligatory carnivores, and also they're acting purely on instinct because they're living in their nature and they're acting on instinct. They don't think about the morals of chasing down the gazelle and biting its neck. They just do it because that's what they do because it's a lion. But like that's what I was saying before, toss a human out into the elements without any tools and without any fire, and you go see how much of a natural predator you are. It's silly. It's a joke. You get your meat at the grocery store and you pay someone else to do the killing for you and to trim the meat for you and to clean it for you and all of that. And even if some people do their own hunting and they say that they eat the meat that they hunt, I still have my doubts of that because I doubt that those people are eating that meat 100% of the time. Even then, what is the morality of that type of action? So, I mean, before I go completely down a rabbit hole there, I just think that's an important distinction because, like, we're not saying that humans aren't exceptional. Like, we're saying that we shouldn't be at the top of the food chain, not that we aren't or not that we can't be. Like, we've proven that we can dominate and we can be at the top of the food chain. But the question then becomes like, should we?
What should you do with that power?
Right. It's like Uncle Ben said it best to Spider-Man, Peter Parker, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Didn't think I'd be making a Spider-Man reference,
He
but
did a pretty good job.
he did. He did a good job with that.
Mhm.
And it's important to keep that in mind. I mean, obviously that's like a pretty profound and important message for people to remember in lots of different ways, but in this way too. And that's like an important part, I think, of the way that we discuss veganism is like the responsibility of having the ability to rationally analyze our ethics and our decisions and what we're eating and of the current conditions of industrial animal farming and like how unethical it is to source your meat in that way. Because like you just said, Liz, like about lions, like they aren't killing their gazelles by the billions. They're not, keeping them in these artificial crates and shipping them to slaughterhouses. It's a different.
Psychotic.
Literally, it seems psychotic. Um, yeah, I mean that's an interesting place to be when we're talking about this is discussing industrial animal farming because I mean, I'm very interested in the history of it. It's a very new thing in the human experience. Like, while humans have always eaten meat and we've evolved eating meat, our ancestors ate meat. It's a very new thing in the human experience. Like, we're talking the last 150 years that industrial animal farming has been prevalent in our culture, and that it's, before then, it was mostly just people in their local communities. There'd be a farmer and people would get their meat in that way, or they would go and do hunting and gathering. Um, having like factory farms where there's like tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of sentient birds crammed into little crates. Like, that's a new part of the human experience. And it really changes the way that we should look at our food. But, people, it's normalized for people and they don't like quite realize like how abnormal this is for us to be doing this as a species to all these other species. So, okay, we want to move along because we want to talk about industrial animal farming. And as we do, we want to relate it to our favorite TV shows. Bliss and I were both born in 95, grew up in the 90s, the 2000s, grew up watching Nickelodeon, Disney Channel,
Oh yeah.
all that stuff. Nickelodeon kids.
That's right.
And the old sponge, as he's called, right?
That's right. The
That's
old
right.
sponge.
The old sponge. And we were watching SpongeBob. Why don't you share about the episode and what it is that we want to share about our SpongeBob experience and how this relates to industrial farming, how this relates to veganism, all that. Let's
So
get into
this
it.
story starts off with season 2, episode 39A, titled "The Jellyfish Hunter." This is a SpongeBob episode that Josh and I both had seen throughout our childhood, and basically the plot of the scene that we're referencing is that, well, the episode begins with SpongeBob jellyfishing. That's something that he does for sport, and he'll catch a jellyfish use its jelly for a sandwich or just to have later on as a snack, and then he'll release the jellyfish and let it free. And in this episode, he brings one of those sandwiches to work with the jelly on it, and this fish sees him, a customer fish sees him at his work and is like, "What do you have there?" And he explains that there's jelly on it, and this fish goes wild and starts freaking out and singing about it. And then Mr. Krabs catches a whiff of this money that is a possibility for him, this money maker, and he's like, "Okay, we have to figure out how to source as many of these jellyfish as we possibly can and make as much money as we possibly can off of this because it seems like it's extremely popular and amazing." So he has SpongeBob do all this work and grabs all these jellyfish and is like, "Yeah, this is gonna be great. Like, well, we'll let them free when we're done." And it kind of be a natural cycle, but he finds this factory that Mr. Krabs created where all the jellyfish are crammed in this like uncomfortable conditions and they're being used for all their jelly. And then once they're used, they get thrown in the trash and discarded and they're useless. And I just remember seeing that episode and like thinking how, wow, that's really sad that that happens. Like I hope that this gets resolved. And the end of the episode, it did. And SpongeBob conquered the day, saved the day, and, had Mr. Krabs stop this whole operation. But, we watch it again as adults and it's like full circle. Like we come with this vegan journey and we're like, wow, that factory looks like almost a better life than a lot of the creatures that we're even talking about, like cows and chickens and, all these different farm animals and, animals that are used for food. That episode really encapsulates the way that we feel, and the way that things really happen. I think they did a good job.
Yeah,
If that's what they
it's
were trying to if that's the message they were trying to get out there, I'm not sure, but
there's
it definitely hit
definitely
home for me.
some vegan overtones in
What
that
about
episode.
you? Like, do you have any other details I missed or anything to add to
Yeah, well,
that experience for you?
I mean, it was funny for us because we were just like, it was just an average night. We got a little bowl of cereal. Let's get some homemade oat milk. Let's go sit
Mm.
down and watch some SpongeBob, just like the old days. And next thing you know, we're having like this profound vegan eye-opening experience, and we're seeing like things that maybe had been planted into our brains as seeds when we were younger, but we hadn't really like actualized that information yet in a way that we were able to have any traction with and understand.
I don't think we knew what capitalism was.
Yeah, we had to learn about capitalism first, and then we have a whole new framework to look at this through. But
Mr. Capitalist Krabs.
yeah, Mr. Fat Cat Crabs over here. It's a perfect microcosm because what the episode shows is a symbiotic relationship between SpongeBob and this creature where, like SpongeBob kind of cares for the creature in a way and like it gives him some of its jelly and they have like a friendship. And it's like, then that ends up getting, taken and put on.
Exponentially multiplied and exploited.
Talk about capitalism again. So yeah, like it gets exponentially, like you said, exponentially exploited and grown into this crazy thing where there's hundreds and thousands of these jellyfish going through like this conveyor belt and getting their jelly squeezed out of them until they look like a old balloon, and then they're
Mhm.
tossed into a bucket. And
It's unnatural. That's
yeah,
the point.
and it shows how quickly it all gets corrupted, like something that might be seen as like some sort of a symbiotic relationship, whether or not it actually was that from the start. It ends up becoming this horrific show of force, from the oppressor and the oppressed, and it's clear when you look at it through those terms, who the oppressor and who the oppressed is. And then the thing that is such an important lesson in that is like Mr. Krabs rolling in the dough is such a profitable enterprise, and then we have SpongeBob running in and saying like, what is this horrible, awful place? And he's like this innocent, pure energy that helps to kind of bring it all to an end and helps to bring some rationality into the situation. Unfortunately, we don't have like a SpongeBob figure in the world who's able to kind of run in and clean things up. That was just a short episode of SpongeBob SquarePants. We've got like a whole lifetime of suffering to go through. And really it's like it's so hard to wrap your head around the vast quantity of animals that are like subjected to this kind of experience.
I mean, when you're not exposed to it, you don't live on a farm or you're not from a rural, even a remotely rural type of area. Like you've lived in a big city your whole life or even something, a small city, even. If you're not exposed to that type of lifestyle, then I think it's really easy to forget how many animals are suffering and also to recognize that, okay, wow, it hasn't always been this way. Because for me, I wouldn't have thought twice about the history of factory farming. I would think, um, if anything, I guess technology has advanced, but I would think maybe that a similar amount of animals are dying in proportion to the amount of people on the earth. Not necessarily like people eating a lot more meat suddenly. Like that definitely has happened. And I think people eat meat a lot more than they maybe even used to at this capacity.
Well, I mean, if we're talking in like large historical terms, then yes, like, in terms of in the last 100 years compared to previous chunks of 100 years before that, yeah, like in the last 100 years, we've adopted heavy meat, heavy friendly diet in Western countries, but really like all over the world because there's just been such a motivated effort by these industries to create systems for exploiting these animals in the easiest ways, or in the most profitable ways, I should say. There's so many different examples of how animals, like the natural process of animals, the natural selection has been interfered with and tampered with by humans, by like the leaders of the industries who, for instance, they want to have the cows that will produce more milk. They want to have chickens that were going to have fatter thighs and bigger breasts.
Broiler chickens.
Broiler chicken,
That's
they
what they're
call them broiler
called.
chickens. Um,
Terrible.
Hens that will lay more eggs than their bodies can even handle. So like there's all these ways that these animals have been kind of put into these Frankenstein bodies that aren't even resembling what they were in the first place. That's what the impact of industrial farming is. I mean, like cows and chickens and pigs of today don't look the same as
They've
they
been
did.
manipulated to serve humans and also,
Hmm.
I mean, just to appeal to their taste buds, let's be honest. But
Right.
I mean, yeah, I guess I was more just to be clear, I think I was referring mainly to like the farm animals, like cows and chickens and that. I feel like yeah, there's a lot more breeds, there's a lot more specifications that have been added to the ways that people use animals for food and
Yeah.
other products, like clothing, for instance, too, with, fur and feathers and all
Leather.
these things. Yeah, leather, obviously. Yeah, there's lots more ways to not be vegan other than what you eat. It's
Yeah.
also
Vegan
maybe
isn't,
what you wear.
like we said before, it's not just a diet, it's a full framework. So if that includes, avoiding getting the leather shoes, then that's what that means. Then and avoiding getting things that were tested on animals. If you can, you can always look at labels and figure out things that way. You want to make sure that there isn't unfair exploitation that's being uh, contributing in the products that you're purchasing, because that's really ultimately like one of the main points of veganism is that it's an economic boycott. Like we're not going to give our money to these industries that we think are doing things that are immoral and
And that does
unethical.
not mean that you're spending more money. That does not mean that you're breaking the bank by going vegan. I think that just as a side note, I would like to add that you can have an expensive budget being non-vegan as well. People buy very expensive non-vegan products all the time.
Right.
So I think that that's just like an interesting point to add because I hear a lot that being vegan can be considered expensive or not cost effective in all circumstances, which I don't believe is true.
Yeah. I mean, being vegan is expensive if you buy the expensive vegan products.
Just as
Yeah.
non-vegan products
It's
can be as
how it goes for
expensive.
everyone.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, sometimes it requires being a little bit more creative. Like, listen, I love to make cheese. We make, of course, vegan cheeses. We, out of all different types of things, usually nuts, but rice and potatoes and starches and all different types of things you can make cheeses out of. And like, obviously, if you make your own cheese at home out of those raw ingredients, it's going to be a little bit cheaper than if you buy the prepared cheese. So it's things like that. Like, there's just little trade offs that you have to make. So yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up because there is kind of a misperception that being vegan is like an elite thing because some of the products cost more. But I mean, ultimately, like it just means if you normally every week buy a pound of ground beef and you're gonna like switch over and get a pound of the Impossible ground beef, like yeah, that might be kind of a pricey switch for you. But if you kind of weaned yourself off of the ground beef because you've learned that it's an unethical choice, you start to move away from those types of products, move towards whole food, plant-based products. Maybe you will find like a lentil ground, something like that, something out of chickpeas, something out of nuts. You create all different types of things to replicate the textures and the tastes that you love and miss. And,
The nostalgic flavors, the things that are traditional to you, the herbs and all the things that you can remember incorporating, that's the most exciting part about the journey so far is kind of recreating those flavors in a way that's really satisfying to your taste buds, but also to your soul and to, kind of recreate your past through your
mhm,
food. And also, I think just to add, I think that vegan cheese is probably the most fun I've ever had, like making things that seem kind of tricky or seem like it could be a little bit tedious. I would definitely recommend if you're a sensitive, creative, kind of like artisanal type of foodie, then I think that vegan cheese is the thing to try. It's the thing for you because it's so much fun. You can have so much fun with that. So,
yeah, it's like a whole new world to explore. But I
yeah, it's
mean,
a true art.
it truly is. And I think that this is like a whole topic. Like I feel us like we would talk about this for so long right now. So we're
Food.
gonna if
Yes.
yes, we're gonna do a full episode just on vegan food, vegan substitutes, the things that Lisa and I like to make, the techniques that we use to kind of replicate some of these things.
Beginner tips.
Beginner tips,
We'll
more
offer some
intermediate
tips.
tips,
Advanced.
wherever
We'll
you find
offer
yourself.
all of the advice that we can in terms of this journey, especially with our food, because I do think that we are both very passionate about that, about cooking.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the reason that we're passionate about it is because it feels so good knowing that every meal that we eat, we've reduced to the best of our ability the amount of suffering and death that went into
Mhm.
that plate. Like obviously, that's kind of the point of veganism is it's like you're reducing the amount of suffering and pain. That's a kind of a common argument that people might have against veganism is like, well, you're not actually, you think that there aren't a bunch of bugs and mice that get harmed in producing your veggies. Like you can't avoid, there's always going to be some death involved with producing food in general on an industrial capacity, which is true, but that doesn't mean that you have to like purposefully, needlessly take the life of an animal. So really what veganism is not saying, hey, there's no suffering and there's no death involved in what the food that we're eating. It's saying, hey, we did the absolute best that we could to know that we're avoiding suffering and death on this plate. Like we're not eating the remains or the byproducts of any of these animals. And the reason that that feels so good is because we were kind of scratching at it before, and I want to bring it up before we go here tonight, is that like the amount of like the quantity of animals on a monthly, a yearly basis that exist in the animal agricultural industrial sector. Like there's just, it's so far beyond the realm of understanding. It's
What's
like,
the number?
okay,
How many
get
how
down to the
many
brass tacks.
land animals correct? Because it's hard to track marine life.
Yeah. So it's hard to track marine life because there's all types of different fisheries and they're totally unregulated. A great documentary is called Seaspiracy. It's on Netflix, or at least it used to be. I think it might still be there. And it kind of gets into all the crazy ways that the fisheries are just a wild industry, and the plastic pollution and the ocean dead zones and like all that stuff. But basically that movie kind of details how it's hard to get accurate estimates because of the fact that it's so unregulated. But basically, estimates for marine life is anywhere from like 1 to 3 trillion sentient lives every year. That's just for fish. So like that number is like unfathomable. Even if it's at the lower end, 1 trillion a year is like crazy to think about. It's just wild. So if you're sympathetic to fish, then that's an interesting number. Maybe it takes a little bit for you to have your care and attention extending to fish, because a lot of people are going to first be most attentive to like cows and pigs.
The ones that look closest to their pets.
Yeah, the mammals, the four-legged mammal creatures.
Sure.
Which, quick little side note, this is something that Liz and I have always noticed. It's interesting how in our culture, the birds and the fish get referred to as their names, but the mammals don't. So like, for instance, we call salmon salmon, we call chicken chicken, we call turkey turkey, but we call cow beef, we call pig pork, we call pig bacon.
The euphemisms.
Exactly.
And also, when you go to a cafe or something like that and you order your coffee and they ask you what kind of milk you want. Do you want oat milk? Do you want soy milk? Or would you like regular? And I almost want to be like,
What is regular?
What the hell is regular milk? And then they, it's like just your gears grind for a second. You're like, wait, what? Oh, cow's milk, dairy.
Oh, milk from a cow.
Oh, milk from a cow. That's what you're saying.
Intended for its child.
Gotcha.
Got it.
To me, oat milk's regular. So I guess that word all in itself is subjective.
Yeah. Well,
anyways,
that's just a side note, because we've always talked about that. I think that's like such an interesting distinction, and it says a lot about like the cultural understanding of these animals, that like you said, like the pigs and the cows, they have a little bit more like empathy and understanding from people because they're mammals, they're four-legged mammals. They have backbones. They're related to, they at least we can see how they're related to our house pets in ways.
They have measurable levels of intelligence that are higher than birds or fish.
Right. And those measurable levels of intelligence, what does it give them? It gives them the right to have a euphemism, so we can call their meat pork instead of pig.
Burger.
Burger, exactly. So anyways, that side note aside, we talked about marine life and the ridiculous figures of the amount of lives that are taken every year in fishing for seafood. When we're talking about land animals, we're talking somewhere in the vicinity of 72 billion land animals every year in the industrial farming industry. And that comes down to, if you're wondering, that comes to around 25 million animals every day. That's actually just in the United States, and 200 million animals in the world every day.
And these statistics are coming to you from the Humane League, and we'll link that below as well.
Yeah, a great animal activism, animal advocacy organization to look into if you're interested in getting involved.
Volunteer work. There's a bunch of opportunities. There's a bunch of information, and you can educate yourself there, like we were saying before.
And like those numbers, they're probably like they're estimates, right? But they're way more firm, because when it comes to like 1 to 3 trillion, like that's a pretty wide window. There's a lot that can fall into that, obviously. And it gets a little bit finer of a statistic when we talk about land animal slaughter, just because it's easily trackable. Like we're able to know. So that really is the impact of it. And that's just devastating to think about. 72 billion land animals a year. And we have 8 billion humans in the world right now. I mean, that's just crazy to think about the numbers. And I heard once that we kill more animals if you include the ocean and land sea animals. We kill more animals every month for industrial farming than there have ever been humans to exist in the world ever in history, just in 1 month. So like trying to wrap your head around those numbers is intense. It's a lot, but it helps to illustrate why this is such an existential issue and why this is so important.
And why we're so radical and or passionate
Yeah.
about these topics.
The passionate empaths. Yeah. Just
coming back to the meaning of the podcast and our intention behind what we want to talk about, the different topics and who we wish to connect with. We hope that people listening out there have some things to add, some conversations to have with us. And, we hope to connect with you all soon.
Definitely. Yeah, it seems like a good place to wrap up because we definitely, like Liz said, this is like, we don't come into this podcast thinking that we're kind of going to be up on our soapbox and we're going to say our opinions and just proclaiming this into the internet world. We don't want this to be an echo chamber for ourselves. We don't want this to be a one-way discussion.
We leave it open-ended. Like, we believe that we should leave you with questions to be asking yourself, and also hopefully leaving you with questions that might provoke questions that you will have for us as well. So we can have some stimulating conversations about these things.
So with all that said, we hope that you will all continue to join us for future episodes as we keep digging into some of these topics. Right now, this is an audio-only podcast. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the places where you find your podcasts. We don't really have much of a schedule yet, but we're gonna try to just kind of maintain with a podcast every now and then, maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, something like that, just to kind of get together, start to explore some of these ideas in more detail. And as we go, we want to kind of grow and learn and explore together, kind of maybe evolve this into video podcasting, maybe some live streaming where we can have some conversations in real time with everybody. So we have some aspirations of where we want this podcast to go. But for right now, it seems like a good place to wrap it up. This is a good first episode. Love being able to discuss veganism in an open forum like this. So Liz, any parting words that you have for everybody on our first episode here?
I look forward to connecting with everyone. I also look forward to having our guest speakers that we're going to have in the future so we can have more interesting discussions with experts and professionals that have been in the vegan game for a long time or just as long as us.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to all of it. I hope everybody else is. So thanks again for joining us for the first episode here of the Radical Empaths Podcast. My name's Josh.
And I'm Liz.
And we're going to see you next time.